Hi, thanks. I'm Brock Kraft. I'm here from London, where I'm a research fellow at the London Knowledge Lab, which is a research institute in educational technology that's part of the University of London. I wear several hats. I also teach physical computing at Goldsmiths, University of London, which is really well known for their arts education. And until recently, I was a co-director at Tinker London, which was a design consultancy set up by the Arduino crew in London to do design services consulting around physical computing, making things talk, Internet of Things. So I've got several different hats. Today I'm talking about three projects. One former project that I did at Tinker London, and a project that I recently completed. My background's in visualization of data as well as physical computing, so I have a little short visualization project I thought I'd share. And then, as Jason alluded to and mentioned, I'll be talking a bit more about net chimes and talking about the technical. And in fact, most of my discussion will be a little bit more of the sort of technical details rather than the sort of the philosophy of this kind of work or the theory behind it. I'll answer all those questions like, well, did you use Max MSP for that? So anyway. So the first project I want to talk about, I did while I was at Tinker London. This project was a commercial project. More and more people are trying to make commercial projects out of physical computing, what really has lived in the kind of the arts computing domain, because advertisers and major brands are kind of getting really interested in, wow, well now we can make things interactive and it's not just stuck on a screen. You know, maybe we can move things off the screen and into the real world where people are and make them buy stuff. So that's, if you're going to try to make a career or commercialize physical computing, it tends to be around that kind of activity. So this project, and the people who are paying for this most, by the way, tend to be mobile providers and hip and happening kinds of brands. So the concept that we worked with a company called Dare Digital, which was is a digital agency in London, and their client was Sony Ericsson, and they wanted to do something that would bring Twitter to bear on their launch of a new mobile phone. So the concept involved having a warehouse where space hoppers were born, and space hoppers are these guys here, right? You may have seen a campaign around this about a year ago. So they wanted to sort of show the backstory behind where these space hoppers live and breathe and give people an opportunity to kind of create and assist in the birthing process of bringing these space hoppers to life as part of the rest of the mobile campaign that they were launching. So we worked with Dare Digital to create the space hopper warehouse where the space hoppers were inflating and being brought into the world. And the idea was that people would be able to interact with these via Twitter, and then also to feed into what would be done with the space hoppers, how they would be released into the world. Would they be dropped from a balloon or set out onto the Thames, the river in London? Would they be, thrown into the streets of Spain? Who knows? So the idea was to connect people up and give them feed into the campaign live. So video cameras, live streaming cameras were set up inside this warehouse in order to give people a view on what the warehouse looked like, what activity was going on, and we had technicians, and you can see those technicians who would tend to the new space hoppers. So you could essentially go to a website, and over time, these space hoppers would inflate and gradually be ready to be launched into the world. So we kind of sketched in processing quickly what this might look like. How would this evolve over time as people inflated more and more of these space hoppers to make decisions about, well, what would the interaction actually be? How much inflation would go on? What would it look like once the space hoppers are inflated? And what would the sort of aesthetic effect be? So processing is really good for sketching visual ideas, and that was a useful tool which we used for that. After we did that, we embarked upon the big project of actually fabricating this. So this is the warehouse in South London where we staged the live event, which once it went live, went 24/7 streaming video on the web for 2 weeks, day and night, 3 in the morning. There were technicians in this warehouse changing out space hoppers as they became inflated. On the back wall, you don't see in this photograph, but on the back wall, you'll see later there was a feed of the stream coming from the API of Twitter so that you could see the message payload that people were tweeting as they would interact with this installation. And they would essentially send a tweet to a special hashtag, and that would cause one of the space hoppers to partially inflate. And the more people interacted with it, the more the space hoppers would inflate. So this was controlled by, you can see there's a technician, my friend Daniel Soltis, who is ministering to one of these arrays, and they were controlled by an Arduino Mega, not surprisingly, and then the off-screen here on the left and right-hand side were with the webcams and all the lighting equipment and all the technical equipment that supported this activity. It was about a 2-week build and some time to move into the space and a bunch of planning up front. So then the campaign was launched, and you can see what this looked like to somebody who would come to the website. You could there was a feed on the right-hand side. You could send a tweet to it. Back in the back of that, I don't know if you can see that, there's a big pile of space hoppers that have been inflated. Some guys, the technicians were essentially actors who came in and were paid to perform and minister to the needs of these new space hoppers, and they got kind of creative. So even though nobody could hear him, he played his guitar. There's a nice shot of him at like 3 in the morning when everything is dark and he's still kind of playing to the camera. It was pretty cool. This is early on. You can see that there's 227 hoppers inflated with the hash pumped tag on the left. I don't remember what the total number, was several hundred or 1,000 at the very end, because each hopper would only partially inflate when a hash pumped was sent to Twitter. And so that's the purpose of these lights on the top. Here's another view of the build. It was a pretty substantial space, and cold because there was no heat, and it was November. It was very cold. Here's a test pattern that we built for it. The lights on top were to indicate, to give people an indication of which one of the space hoppers they were inflating, because they couldn't actually select a particular one. So this is just some video we took prior to the launch to make sure everything is working. Nice little test pattern. So that's that project. The next project I'd like to talk about is a little visualization exercise that I've been working on to visualize bicycles in London. London has finally figured out that having bicycles is a good idea, which, the rest of Europe has probably figured out by now, but it's very good that we now have some urban bikes that you can hire, and now tourists and people who are visiting can also hire, and this scheme was funded by, them, who footed the bill for most of the cost. So there are several hundred bike stations and about 5,000 bikes around London that you can now hire. They weigh about 25 kilos, so they're not likely to get stolen, probably. But what was interesting to me about this was, so there, as you expect with any kind of a bicycle hire plan, there are stations with 20 or 30 bikes, and they're dotted all over the city. My interest was kind of just selfish, really. This is a tale of my own personal laziness in a sense, because what I was really trying to do with this was figure out whether or not these bicycles in that particular station, which is about 50 meters from my office, had any bikes in them without having to get out of my desk. And also without having to go to the rather difficult to use website, although they have improved it now. So really, I just didn't want to walk from here all the way over to here so I could see whether there are any bicycles in the station or not. Because around 6 p.m., all the attorneys and lawyers who are in those buildings right there decide that they're going to take a quick hop over to the train station. And so it goes from being 26 bicycles to 0 in about 7 to 10, 15 minutes. But I wouldn't have known that without undertaking this little project. And I didn't want to end up with a situation like this where I would, be out of luck. So the website that they set up to manage this shows all the bicycles in all these different locations. My location is about there. And it's about 3 clicks to get to this map to check. And you can hover your mouse over and see how many bikes are at a particular station. Like I said, it's about 3 clicks. But I never can remember to get there, and I just haven't bothered to bookmark it. So I had to come up with a more technical solution to this problem, which entailed, of course, collecting data about how many bikes were at the bicycle station down from my office. So this is delivered to the web browser as JavaScript, and all the data for all those plots is sent every time someone queries that page. So you get the entire data set, even though you probably only want, the one bike. I don't know, it's kind of a brute force approach, but it works. So I figured, well, I'll just scrape that data for the one that's near my office and find out how many bikes are at that particular location. But then I thought, well, if I want to screen scrape it, somebody has already been down this path before. No matter how many times or, whenever you think you've come up with a clever new idea, obviously somebody has been there and probably done it better than you could. So luckily I figured out, hey, Google it, and a clever person has written a very nice little API, and all you just do is send a simple call to the API, and it sends you back your data in JSON or CSV or XML or whatever format you want. So totally saving me the trouble of having to write a screen scraper and a parser. So there, if you want this later, I can give you that. You probably don't since you don't live in London, but the information's in the presentation. So I set up at my office a little computer, a sad little old Macintosh, and put him in the corner. And all he was doing was calling that API because I wanted to get kind of the trend information over time, like when are the bikes really not available? When am I going to have the best chances of getting a bicycle? And so this little graph that I built on the left just shows for one 24-hour period when their bikes were there and when they weren't. And I thought, well, this could be extended. We could look at not just that one station, but I'd like to see what are the patterns in the city as a whole. It's a logical, kind of question to want to ask. So I started broadening my request from this API and getting the whole data set and building up a bunch of data so that I could kind of visualize that. But of course, 48 hours alone in Excel is a lot of data. This is 2 million items if you count every single data point that's coming back and all the details about every single station. And in Excel, it's just, it's not for that. It's just not for that purpose. So it's very hard to plot. It's not very useful for that kind of a visualization or that kind of a data representation. So I turned to the other tool that probably most people in this room are familiar with, processing, to try to produce a visual representation of what this data might look like. And rather than show you the live running version, I've got a video of what that data looks like here. Now, to anyone who lives in central London, this map is very easy to understand because these 2 parks are major landmarks and the shape of the river is a very well-known shape. So although it may not be immediately relevant or perceptible to you what this is representing, the pattern is quite, or the city is very recognizable to Londoners. And I thought it would be better to not have a map overlay because that wasn't the kind of information I was interested in looking at. I was interested in looking at what are the patterns of movement. So the time is on the lower right hand, and the number that's streaming along the bottom is the number of bicycles available in the system. So you can see that, we'll just play this again. You can see that, and it's a white background, so this is daytime, and now it's about to become nighttime. And you can see that as day changes to night, the pattern is that the bicycles in the middle of the city have spread out to the periphery of the city where people are going to their houses. And in the morning time, they come back to the cluster in the center of the city. And if you take in the processing sketch, of course, you hover your mouse over a particular location. It tells you how many bikes are at that station at a given time. But this is just some video. And you'll notice here, big blocks like that, big blobs like that, are train stations, because commuters go to the train station, leave the bike, go home. At 3 in the afternoon, you can see that most of the bikes are distributed out in the center of the city, and there are very few bikes at the train station itself, but they will be arriving shortly in about 2 hours because everyone's going to want to go home. So in fact, if you look at the data more closely, all the bicycle stations to distribute the load. But they've got it fairly well tuned, even over a 24-hour period. There's usually about 3,000 bicycles available to hire. It just may not be exactly where you want it to be. So now there are other kinds of visualizations you can do with this, and another obvious question is, what are the kinds of flows of patterns of movement that might be in this data? Where are people going to with these bicycles? And of course, this path has been trod before, so I'm so glad that I didn't spend a heck of a lot of time trying to do this visualization, because a beautiful version has been done by a team at UCL, and I want to show you this video of this visualization, which is here. And what's nice about this visualization is you can see these patterns. Now, they didn't know exactly where a bicycle would travel. They would know where it originated and where it ended up, each individual bicycle. So they used an algorithm to plot essentially the best route to give an idea of what the flow of these bicycles was through the city over time. And it's a very nice, they describe it as it's sort of a tadpole visualization, because it's like little baby frogs swimming from one place to the other. This data was from 2010 in October. What's interesting about this is that you can see the same kind of a flow, or the similar patterns of movement in the two representations. And also, you don't have to have the exact GPS location to get still an impression of what is interesting in the data. Oh, that's much better. Right. So the one other interesting thing about this data is, and another reason that I, in fact, could not have produced this visualization, is that this data relies on one very important thing, and that's the serial number of the bicycle. And without that information, there's no way to tell where a bike left and where it arrived at. So the team that produced that visualization had to file a Freedom of Information Act request with the government to get that information, because they don't send that out with the API, with the web page, and you can't get it off the API. So, and it seems kind of ridiculous that you would have to go through that kind of procedure to get access to that kind of data, because there's no way of tying this to an individual user. So this is just one more of my arguments for opening data to everyone so we can have access to it. Since we are public citizens, we are paying for this data, we should get the opportunity to use it. So there are sites like in the US and in the UK, data.gov.uk, that make the data available. If anybody here knows of a site where the government here makes public data available for you to use and explore, let me know, because I'd be interested to know what that is. So organizations like the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and I'm sure there's a similar, well, EFF works here as well, are arguing this same case. We should be able to get access to our data. So I feel pretty strongly about that. Oh, and of course, right, so since I do Arduino, I had to make an Arduino version of this and somehow get an Arduino in there. So I'm right now working on a physical bar graph to hang as an ambient display in my office, so I can see exactly how many bicycles are down the road. So I'll hang this over my desk or something, it'll just be there showing me how many bikes. I harvested these parts out of an old printer, which is why I've got this strange sort of approach to displaying the information, but I thought, I don't really want to throw this printer in the bin. Wouldn't it be nice to use it for something creative? So anyway, last project, as Jason mentioned, is NetChimes. I'm going to show you some of the backstory or some of the back-end technology behind NetChimes. As he already explained, we're installing wind chimes in several different locations around the world, and hopefully going to create a collaborative, networked musical instrument. This is going to rely, or does rely currently, on Arduino to do wind sensing in locations, and each of the chimes has a wind sensor built into it, and also actuators, because if a chime gets information from another chime, I can play the sound of, say, wind blowing in Tromsø in London, and vice versa, and send, or Bournemouth, Tom has a Bournemouth location, so we can send the music around to all these different locations using Open Sound Control and OSC groups. And another additional interesting dimension to this is you can take the sound of the chimes and then digitize samples of it and also send those so that people who may be able to hear what they sound like even if they don't have a chime of their own. So we set up a shoutcast to take information from Pure Data and to send that information to anyone who wants to listen to it. And so we were playing around with this. So essentially you can go to a web browser and go to the shoutcast stream and listen to the information that's being sent. So my chime in London right now is chiming away, and you can listen to the data. So there are some sites set up right now, right there. We were testing this, and I thought, well, okay, if I can listen to it on a web browser, I wonder if I could just listen to any web browser. And so my wife and I were sitting in our living room, and I thought, well, I've got a web browser on this. I wonder if I can just stream the data from here. And so if you can turn this microphone on. So this is the wind in London right now, actuating chime sensors, or a chime sensor that is part of the network. So basically I can carry around the wind chime wherever I happen to be, which is a really kind of novel and cool idea. I mean, in certain circles it may not be that novel and cool, but I thought it was pretty nifty. I would encourage anyone to get their computer out and play along when I give you the link in just a second. So maybe we'll have a network performance right now and you didn't even expect it. The idea is that you have some chimes, as Jason alluded to. I got the granddaddy, the biggest chimes I could find in the world, which is made by a company called Woodstock Chimes, which is a really fascinating company that makes really well-tuned, very precisely engineered chimes. These are actually very large, and they're made of about 1 centimeter thick aluminum solid wall tubes that are tuned and cut to the right length so that they resonate. So you strike one of these chimes and it resonates for, 45, 50 seconds longer. I don't know, a long time. So they very kindly donated a set of chimes to the project, their best ones, and it's really nice to have that. So here's the prototype sensor. This is actually what is transmitting data right now. Eventually that sensor will be integrated into the chimes themselves. This is a proof of concept, really. And this seems to work pretty well. There's one in Tromsø. There are 2 in Tromsø. There's one in Bournemouth. And we're hoping people will be excited about this and maybe think about building some sensors for their own backyards. Here's a little video of the actuator array that's going to go... can you hear this? Yeah, okay. So obviously it's an Arduino controlling actuators. So when I get data from Tromsø or Bournemouth or wherever, I'm just going to fire off these little solenoids and trigger my chimes. This is a work in progress, so we're just getting the momentum going on it. So I'm just doing a little test here. So here's the opportunity to demo, right? So go to netchimes.org right now and let's see if we can bring the streaming server down. Shall we? It won't be hard, right? So go here, and if you go to, this is the website for, this very conveniently displays the website at the same time. Oh, lovely. Oh, use the PZM. So right here are links to the live feeds. So if you click on one of these links, it'll take you to the Shoutcast server, and if you click on this very hard to find link right in the middle, it'll open up a stream. So somebody else should do something besides London, because we have Bournemouth. Okay. So look, it's a network performance. I love it, right here. Impromptu. It's fantastic. And the nice thing about it is anybody can be an audience member anywhere at any time. I mean, Barbara and I just like took her iPad and listened to it in the living room. The chimes were not audible. We were just in our living room, and we had suddenly wind chimes in our living room. It was fantastic. So that's where we're getting to with this project right now. And I'm really excited about where it's going to go from here. And keep updated on the website, and hopefully we eventually will be able to have other people participate and build their own. And I mean, obviously, we want to broaden out the whole project to everyone. So, as was mentioned earlier, I'm going to be doing a beginner's workshop on Saturday, 2 beginner's workshops. So if you can't make the morning one, come to the evening one. And this is very, very much the basics of Arduino. It's for people who don't know anything about electronics or anything related to programming, but so it's an opportunity to either learn something new or to refresh what you may have forgotten. And it's a very just no-nonsense, here's how it works, very interactive. Well, there'll be kits for sale so that you can buy a kit of materials. All you need is a laptop. So thanks to Alexander for arranging everything for this event, and the whole crew for Art.on.Wires, I should say AOW. Also to the Tinker London team, my colleagues who work with me on that project, and to Jason and Tom and the rest of NetChimes who are working on that project, and of course to the people who gave us the donation. So thanks very much, and I'll take any questions if you have them.
How much will the kit cost?
For the workshop, they'll be, I don't remember how much, they're 25 pounds, I think. I don't know how much it is in euros. Alexandra has the cost.
I'm not sure. I checked the website. I think I put it on the website.
It'll just be whatever it costs to get it over here. 300 kroner. Yeah, maybe. So check the website. I mean, it's not like a big profit center or anything. Fantastic. Okay, great, cool. No other questions? Okay. Thanks very much.